Hey, let me guess. This is episode 55 of The Front Lounge with Congos. Our guest today is, let me guess, someone you met at Sam's.
Yes. Put it on the auto switcher there, Joe. There we go. Our guest today is Brooks Hamilton, AI aficionado, pool player extraordinaire, coffee connoisseur, and writer, I guess. Is that a...
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we met at Sam's, and then we just got to talking about there's a lot of common ground about what we like to talk about. And pool really is one of those games that I feel like in the right environment, I've now appreciate the game, obviously for its own sake, but also because it attracts the variety of people I tend to like. Mm-hmm. You know, like even our mutual friend Brian. I had no idea what he was really like, and I was like, yeah, I guess I kind of like that guy. He's all right. He's very quiet. And then finally that one night when you left Sam's and I talked to him, I was like, oh, this guy's fucking fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Pool is eternal, it says on the chat.
Yeah.
Pool is eternal.
It is. It's there are certain games, chess is one of them. Go, obviously, is older than chess. Yeah. They are such well-designed games that they are like self-renewing, and pool is one of those games, I think.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about pool is you also have that physical element to it, as well as the mental and mathematical part of it. Mm-hmm. And
it's like if you had to have chess control, where your thought experiments had to actually play out. As I'm sure Kings probably did, as portrayed in a bunch of comedy movies of, knight to e4, and then someone goes and cuts someone's head off. Mm-hmm. Before we go anywhere, it's like a joke. You met him at Sam's, but tell everyone listening for the first time, what is Sam's and what is so fucking special or funny or weird and cool about that place? Because it is a real vortex. I've only been there a couple times because I got a newish baby and I'm a lazy person, so I stay at home all the time. But what is it about that place?
Sam's is unique. I went there several times. I was like, nah, not for me. And then at the beginning of this year, after a number of kind of shifts and thinking a lot more, being a little bit of a different frame of mind, I went there and I thought, wait a minute, this may be the best American pub that there's ever been. And, when we think about pub, we think about that British phenomenon of old building, Guinness pints, everybody kind of sitting, talking quietly. But this is it is a uniquely American and like Austin institution in that when you walk in, it's small, it's old, nothing is much changed. There's a woman who apparently has had a reserved seat there for the last 40 years. But the big differences are there's a band, there's a dance floor, there's a nice little pool area, and very comfortable seating. So it's just entirely different from that British tradition.
Yeah.
But there's a quality to it that makes it feel that this is what I'm not a huge fan of this phrase, but it is what it is. There is no changing the authenticity of what it's representing there.
So it's kind of like the Platonic unchanging eternity that everything else is the mirror of in the cave. Is that what you're saying?
Well, maybe as put by our mutual friend with face tattoos, he said there are two things that power South Austin. And those two things are Barton Springs Pool and Sam's.
Yeah. And Penny. Right, Penny's like the river that runs through the middle of Sam's, because I've thought about this a lot because
Penny is who? That's
Penny's
the lady, the former owner.
Former owner, yeah, and she is there almost. I don't think I've ever not seen her there. Right, like she sits in that corner seat and watches the band. And if you're standing in her way, she kind of looks at you like, what the fuck are you doing? Get out of my way.
It's like a friendly Twin Peaks vibe.
Yes.
Like I don't get particularly any sinister thing. Maybe there is something lurking, but it's got some of the same weirdness occurring.
I mean, I've been under the deck there. Like, I feel like I'm more intimately familiar with Sam's than a lot of people because someone dropped their weed pen down there. Mm-hmm. And they were going, oh, I don't think I can get that. So I went under the deck, and I was like, I'm going to get to know Sam's a little better. And then I've been through the back and got coffees from there. So I feel like I know it, better than your average outsider. It really is a Twin Peaksy type of unique place. It's got a very unique backstory.
I mean, again, like I've not gone out a lot here, but if I had guests from out of town or our friends came to visit from South Africa, it's probably the first place you take them to say, what's Austin like? Mm-hmm. You could take them anywhere. You could take them to the tech broy areas, but I think
what's funny though? It's actually not what Austin is like.
No, it's what perhaps the idea of Austin is like, in the same way that when you say America, there's an idea of America, and then there's all the manifestations of America.
Yeah, because the other, like I won't name names just in case, but like the other venues in town, which also to a degree epitomize Austin, mm-hmm. I feel there's lots of things I don't like about them, and that objectively there are things I don't like about Sam's. Like, it feels like it's falling apart. There's endless holes in the ceiling. The carpets probably haven't been washed in 40 years, but that's all inconsequential compared to the set of priorities that they actually have. Like, the piano broke, it was fixed the next day, right? So the PA sounds good.
PA is excellent.
The owner re-tipped all the pool cues. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, all of the shortcomings of Sam's, all they are is an indication of the pure priorities that they have.
Great value structure.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my personal favorite aspects of it is the urinals, and it's not the urinals, it's that as you're at the urinal, if you look up, there's a photo of just looking like old piping. You're like, why did somebody take a photo of rusted piping and then mount it above a urinal? And the answer is, that was the urinal that was there before.
Yeah. Sam sounds like the radium in Joburg. Holy shit. Yes. It's not quite that, but there is absolutely a thread there. Yes, the
Radium is one of the oldest live music beer halls in Johannesburg, which is a fairly old city, Johannesburg. Yeah. And we went there. I mean, the last time we were there was 2016, and we went there and chatted with the owner and got a bit of the history there. Yeah. The cool thing they had at the Radium was all those. They had newspaper clippings throughout South Africa's history of just like the most absurd headlines. Yeah, and it's again a really cool place. Great music, good drinks, and
that's where we made our American friends drink cane and cream sodas and Stro rum.
Stro rum.
Yeah.
I guess every city's got that. All the people in Chicago talk about Malort. Mm-hmm. Which is like their drink, their dare drink, finish at night here. Straw rum is the South African one.
It's Austrian, but yeah.
Oh yeah, Austrian, but it might as well be South African.
Austrian sounds a lot scarier.
It's 180 for you, Brooks. It's 180 proof rum that people drink at the end of a night of drinking.
Because they want to die?
First one to hospital loses, sort of thing.
I do remember Johnny's wife. We were somewhere there, and we got shots of straw rum, and we all drank it. And she goes, "It's not that bad." And 10 minutes later, she was shit faced. It was like
not even. It was quicker. Just it hits you just like that. And she was also like, "Oh yeah, like." I'll do it. Stop making such a big deal out of it. And everyone, including our good friends from South Africa, were like, "Call the ambulance."
Right. So there's a guy you should meet. I know he's a professor of pharmacology at UT, and I was talking to him. He was talking to me about this phenomenon, which is that if your blood alcohol level rises quickly enough, it creates a kind of euphoria. There's a hysteresis in everything, and in enzymatic activity in the body. And he was basically talking about the phenomenon of a small dose causing one effect, a medium dose causing another effect, and a large dose causing an effect you didn't necessarily anticipate. And alcohol is kind of obvious because your body can't. If you were to drip it in there, it would clear it at a certain rate. But the kind of gears that turn on when something crosses a threshold are not revealed until that threshold.
That's why a Boilermaker is such a great thing. shot and a beer combo
Right.
done like on tour. That's what the one thing. If people ask what do I miss about tour, it's having Boilermakers with Mick
Right.
at some bar at like 3 p.m. somewhere.
They call
You
them
just-
two steps here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Of course.
A shot and a beer. It's like you if you're gonna drink, there's you can drink all kinds of ways, but if you're trying to get that immediate alcohol impact, do it properly, and that's one way to do it.
I don't miss drinking with Mick. Mick is our Scottish tour manager, and he nearly killed me once with martinis, so I don't miss that at all.
Oh, I remember that night.
Yeah.
So we should get into part of the reason that you came here saying that you were the world's most authoritative expert on AI.
Yeah, that's how I introduce
And
myself everywhere.
basically, if you know more than 3% of what's going on, that's true to me. So we thought we'd chat about that a bit. Could you tell us a little bit about like how you are involved and your understanding of AI, and then perhaps, like we said before the show, just kind of walk us through as if I'm a 5-year-old who doesn't understand everything, which shouldn't be hard to do.
Yeah. So I've spent the majority of my career working on implementing what we call like decision support.
Oh, no, sorry.
Danny's trying to hand
I
you a
was like,
drink.
no.
No, I think he's just
Do
trying
I-
to get you on mic a little bit more.
I didn't know if it was that or he was offering me a shot, but implementing what we call decision support software. And that means just trying to make decisions easier in environments that are very difficult to sort through all the variables going on. And usually where that's shown up, at least in my career, is pricing decisions. So if you think about like large contracts, multi like $100 million, $200 million contracts, there are a lot of options in those contracts. Like how much volume can you take? What if the price swings? You're trying to understand, did I write a good contract or a bad contract? So we have ways of kind of figuring those things out. Then after that, kind of worked on a lot of complexity. So high complexity environments where the decisions themselves, each decision is really simple, but there are so many decisions that people need to make under so many different environments that it then becomes very challenging to make those in the most commercially profitable way. Mm-hmm. So like a quick example, you're familiar with Home Depot, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Intimately.
So Home Depot has a professional arm too. That's about as large as their retail arm. And every single line item that they sell to somebody, like a plumber or electrician, every single one of those is negotiated. So it doesn't matter whether it's a tiny little electrician or a national group, everything is negotiated. And when a sales rep goes about setting a price, they'll think about something like, hey, I was able to get a win on that price because I was selling to a really big organization, so that price is probably a good one. Now I'm going to turn around and sell it to like a 2-person operation. I'll just use the same price.
Right.
Okay.
So those are kind of like a quick example of that. So I spent about 20 years working on those. Then about 3 years ago,
So to back up, when you say working on those, the software that you're doing, can you get a little more into the weeds of how it's helping these decision processes?
yeah. So that type of software works in a very different way than ChatGPT or some of the other like language models that maybe we'll talk about in a bit work. But the way in which those function is you pull in a tremendous amount of data from the organization that you're working with, like Home Depot, giant data structures. And you kind of figure out, hey, what do similar circumstances look like? And then you group those circumstances together. And this all kind of happens on the computer side. And then from a sales rep, all they see is just, here are 3 prices. Here's where I should start the negotiation. Here's ideally where I should end the negotiation. And whatever I do, if I should not go below a certain price or I'm going to get a call from my manager. And so the decision is still up to them. But It's just kind of a simple way of presenting those results.
Okay.
But it's a really different animal than what we began to see coming up. First in 2014 was when we got like the first glimmers of things, and then in May of 2020 is when the whole world kind of got flipped on its head in terms of artificial intelligence.
So prior to this point, when it's a lot of it's done on the computer side, you said, but it's still relatively manual, as in simple algorithms that are just comparing data, not necessarily making. I guess we'll get into this, what the definition of artificial intelligence is, but not making complicated decisions.
That's right.
About these points of data.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But one thing you told me, or it's in your, we'll post a link to your Medium about this kind of stuff. But the training data set for ChatGPT is the next word guessing, right? It's like the only thing that changes is the size of the training data or the model, the size of the model, and then you get what your my favorite Brooks phrase, emergent phenomena. But so like the actual inputs into the AI is very simple. It's like it's prompted with a sentence,
Yes.
and then it has to guess the next or a missing word or so on.
Yeah.
Right, and that's all that is feeding it basically.
Yes.
And then it's interpreting that. But it's being fed 200,000 books and all sorts of chats and all sorts of online chat, blah, blah, everything you can think of is being fed this, and then being deprived of a word and saying, guess this word. And then its guesses get, I'm assuming, some kind of weighting that educates it. Is that about right?
Yeah. So one way of thinking about this is, many people have tried to reduce what goes on in these large language models, and maybe we'll talk about what a large language model is in a second, to just guess the next word, and that these are just models that are trying to figure out what the next most likely best or most likely thing is to say. Mm-hmm. The way I look at it, and I think the way that the community is beginning to look at it is it's learning its environment. And just like when, if you think about your child, when they were really young, their behaviors seem to be kind of random. Mm-hmm. And then over time, they begin to put things together more and more about their environment. Who feeds them, who gives them safety, who gives them love, how they can be warm, how they can take care of themselves. But they have to figure that out from this, at first, incoherent mess of inputs coming into them. Mm-hmm. And luckily for humans, for babies, they're already dealing with a pretty good-sized model in their minds. And there's probably something that's instinctual there as well. But language models are doing something similar to that, in that they're learning their environment, but their environment is limited exclusively to text and the inputs that are coming into them. So they are predicting what the next best thing is to say. However, they probably have a very rich understanding of the text and the implications of that text that is occurring as they're producing a result for us.
Mm-hmm. So a question that immediately comes to me it's probably a tangent. We don't need to go too far down, but when you think about a baby that's making decisions, there's certain built-in value systems prior to even influence. Mm-hmm. And now we can get pretty deep into where prior begins, because the influence begins probably before birth, it probably begins before conception, it begins at the beginning of time. But for the sake of argument, when they come out, they come with a set of values.
Yeah.
How are the values determined within a language model? That's our values of what we want to be selected. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this entire area of study is known as safety research. And the part that I think we're maybe talking about here is alignment within safety. So it is, there are two types of alignment. One is, how do I know that what my values are reflected in your values, Johnny? And it could be that I think my values are well reflected. And then we would say, great, we're aligned. That means that more likely we can trust each other as we go about making decisions, because I know that your value structure is going to be similar to mine. And we have ways as people of trying to validate these things, but we also know that you might be bullshitting me. You might be hiding part of your values from me for some longer term purpose. You know, we can kind of think about it as like, what's the long-term con on this? So one of the items that's very challenging right now in AI systems is to be able to understand, are we actually aligned? Is there alignment in between a set of human values and a set of AI values? That's kind of what's called an inner alignment.
Are they values? I mean, like all of the wording, and even learning, and it's learning its environment, right? These are all presumptions, and you could make the same argument that there's no. You could make the conscious zombie argument, right?
Sure.
That to each other we may as well be AI, because there's no way to cross that threshold and know whether you're conscious. I only interact with your external manifestations, and similarly, we only interact with the external manifestations of AI. So I'm not at all opposed to the idea that it is intelligence and it's a form of intelligence. What I'm opposed to is pretending to know what intelligence is. You know, I don't know what it is. I don't know where it begins and ends. And maybe intelligence is an inherent property of reality, and that we are artificially trying to bound it to humans. So I'm not one of these people who are, AI it's not learning, it's not this, it's not that. It's like, well, we don't know. We don't even know what learning is from a human or from a life perspective. So I don't know why I would say that it's impossible for a computer to learn.
Well, I think people that are too quick to dismiss the idea that it is intelligence have never thought about
Their own
thought, and the fact that there's no proof that anything I've said isn't basically just from a reduced set of data that came before me.
Right. What's so interesting to me is that it's such a perennial problem, regardless of the current state of technology, that the Greek people used soma as opposed to body. The internal experience of your body is not the same as another body. Whereas in Western thought, we walk around thinking, I'm me and they're them, and we're the same. But you're not, because you are inside out, and they are outside in. So it's not dissimilar. It's always back to that problem of consciousness and the fact that you can't seem to escape your own consciousness. But I mean, we're getting derailed down to philosophy. It's more like the kind of.
To me, it's almost impossible to discuss it without going into that thing, which I know we should try and actually just understand the mechanics of what we're talking about. But it's like my brain keeps going, like I can't hear a word like decision or learn and not think, well, what is the fundamental mechanism that makes a choice? I guess we should leave it there because we're not going to answer that. But, that's where my brain goes on it.
R. Sanchez 11 says philosophical zombies. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. So if we go back just a second to the question about alignment, and one of the challenges of alignment is I can't look into your mind and know for certain what you think. We don't have that capability. And maybe it's one of those things that we should never develop.
I mean, I think they're trying to. I think, we're not far off from remotely being able to at least get some sense of people's thought remotely of their brainwave activity. Obviously, it's probably a pretty deep well that, you can keep things pretty deep inside yourself that might be a far off from understanding, but I think they're trying.
Yeah, actually, I think 2 months ago, there was a study, I believe it came out of Stanford, that showed you can generate images from brainwave activity,
Right.
Yeah.
which that's a little bit shocking and surprising. So maybe that does go a bit of the distance to verify alignment. But we try to look at each other and say, "Oh, I know what they are thinking." We don't. We don't know what another person is thinking, and that's just another person that is biologically and experientially and from a time and geography standpoint very similar
Right.
to us. So I agree with the other point you're making, Danny, of we do not know how a language model or some of the more sophisticated AI applications necessarily perceive the world, and how they go about kind of rationalizing it.
This is I'm only going to talk in tangents today, but that it's an interesting question to think that to guess at how these algorithms or the AI is perceiving the world, to me seems so far very much like you're saying on the tech side of things. It's on the intellectual aspect of human thought, and maybe they're very, very far advanced in understanding basically how humans think intellectually and linguistically. Now, what's a terrifying thought is that if we bring in scientists, computer scientists from the East who have a basis in understanding different centers of humans a little bit better and have that as an idea that there is an emotional component and there's a scientific aspect to that emotional component, is when they start learning and training on that aspect of things. Because I don't know if you've ever had the experience of reading, I mean, you must have, reading something from, I don't know, 50 years ago or 1,000 years ago, where it feels like it was written at you specifically, literally in your head. You hear it spoken to you, and there's a resonance that goes beyond just intellectual alignment.
Yes.
So now that must be something that is being thought and talked about and investigated from the AI perspective, is how to get into these other aspects of human existence beyond linguistic understanding.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I believe Stephen Wolfram has been raising. So if you all are familiar with Wolfram Alpha,
Vaguely.
yeah, it's great site to use if you need something to go from like natural language to something computed like how many miles in between Austin and London. It's great
Right.
at that. So
I mean, I think that other search engines license their tech now, right? So that he invented Mathematica,
Mathematica.
and now the physics project, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the computational physics. Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of a smart cookie. He got his doctorate from Caltech when he was 20, and Richard Feynman was his thesis advisor. So kind of a big deal. The piece that he's kind of trying to chase down right now is, have these language models cracked understanding the underlying semantics of language? So, we've kind of gone back and forth to say, is all of thinking encapsulated within language? And for a while, there have been various arguments like you can only imagine things that you can think about in linguistic terms. I don't agree with that standpoint, but that's what some have said. I think Stephen Wolfram his perspective is, it looks like there's a deeper semantic meaning and a deeper semantic dictionary, and perhaps a set of relationships that work well below the conscious or the linguistic level. And that is what allows the language models to be able to translate concepts from one area to another, but also it allows them to be able to translate linguistically very accurately between one language and another, whereas others were moving word to word to word. These are taking concepts from one language, moving it down to the semantic layer, so they understand, this is the true meaning of this. And now I'm going to move it back up to another language, whether that is a spoken language, like English or Chinese, or whether it is a non-spoken language, like Latin, or more interestingly, like Java or Go, some of the computer languages out there.
Right.
Go ahead.
That, I mean, there's a kind of irony, which is that in order to think of this concept, I only think of it in terms of languages or analogies. But, there's so many parallels, and there's an old idea. Plato was talking about Plato's forms. Jung was talking about archetypes as a kind of semantic or a form existence of predator-prey and everything that stems from that, right?
So it's like the Vedantic pre-manifestation state, or like
right,
something that exists before,
outside of time,
outside of space-time as we understand it.
Yeah, that so that's pretty interesting, and that in the Vedantic stuff, they do talk about the idea that they say they derive their language from it corresponds with something which pre-exists. So the sound of words, etc., all of that kind of stuff, or it corresponds with something which is pre-existing. Which does seem entirely opposed to the kind of the Noam Chomsky type thing, which is that we develop this language through evolution and through expressions of the mouth, and then it influences. It's like it works backwards. Like once the language is there, then we have thoughts, and. So we, how do you separate a thought from language?
It's amazing that a linguist thought that language was the most important thing.
Right. Yeah. I don't know why that's such an obvious point.
What a cunt.
I mean, it is a valid question, which is that I think if you think about it long enough, you can think of examples. They're called feelings. And that's a good. Those aren't thoughts, but they're maybe easier to recognize. To see that. Oh, I do have perceptions which are not linguistically captured.
Yes,
and that is highly obvious. I don't think you need to spend that much time on that question personally. Now, if I were to try to describe these feelings, of course that enters into the domain of language. That doesn't mean there aren't domains outside of language or pre-language, or more fundamental language, however you want to define it. Of course, we only talk with language.
I think it's interesting if you look at like Hindu ideas, the complexity linguistically that exists within the Vedantic tradition is like, it's basically incomprehensible how complicated of a system they have describing the universe. And not just the universe in like an astrological or astronomical way. Like every aspect of life is described within the Vedantas, down to like medicine, music, language. Like they've got an incredibly complex and unmined resource of thought on that. But it also appears to be like the opposite spectrum. The degree of the complexity of the thing also seems to relate to the degree to which they understand that not all things are linguistic. Like they keep trying to expand their ability to describe something that is ultimately indescribable. And those two poles have to coexist, it seems.
Like as Chevy would say, ineffable, not uneffable. But yeah, I mean the Wolfram idea is that there is a kind of a layer of some, like he differentiates between semantics and language, as in, yeah, and you said lower because you come from the programming world. Other people might say higher, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I guess it doesn't make a difference, but the parallel you're drawing there is between low-level languages and high-level languages, right?
Yeah.
It'd be like if we were only exposed to BASIC or C++ or something like that, and then there was another C++ being saying, no, I think there's actually binary code or something.
Like machine code under here.
So
right?
for life is Wolfram saying there is a simple substrate, and from this simplicity emerges enormous complexity.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And that Alan Wallace talks about, he uses that term a lot, substrate of the substrate of being, of consciousness, whatever, again, like words we can't really use to describe it, but that something occurs, it's like a membrane that is passed where the complexity then just like splashes into life that then we have to describe in all these complex terms,
Yes.
but it's there existing. I mean, they describe it as eternity as unchanging, using words, obviously,
Right.
but like that's a way to describe this thing, that what we're seeing is this moving reflection of an unchanging form
Yes.
that exists prior to manifestation down or up, however you want to do it, into this dimension or dimensions.
That you sent me Wolfram's article about the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the most fascinating things I've read recently, because it is so highly philosophical, but it's coming from a mind who's clearly like a next level capable.
And one that's historically, he's in his, I think, early 60s. He's been publishing papers on quantum physics that were peer-reviewed from the point that he was 17. So
Right.
he's coming from a very rigorous scientific background.
Yes,
on this.
I mean, I was not that familiar with him. I'd listened to him on before you talked about him. I'd listened to him on a podcast, and he was fucking fascinating. And what I really liked about him was that the amount he said we don't know or I don't know, that's always encouraging to me, because he's the exact opposite of arrogance. He's so empirical in his approach to everything that for me, he's the epitome of what a scientist should be. And he's the opposite of Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's fucking annoying.
Don't get me started.
Yeah. Anyway, their approaches are so different, and the level of understanding is so different. It's the depth behind Wolfram is like, you can tell it's endless. Anyway, the article you sent me was about entropy.
Yes.
And the second law of thermodynamics. And I'll try to summarize what I gather from it, which is that he would use computer models and then create digital objects with attributes that have behaviors or laws which govern them. Mm-hmm. And if the bounds of these digital objects' environment was symmetrical and simple, you would end up with behaviors that did not look entropic, that would not display automatically the second law of thermodynamics, which is that heat dissipates and chaos, whatever that word means, ensues.
Yeah.
But then by very minorly changing the environment for these digital objects, you would get what appears to be random behavior. And you couldn't deduce the simplicity of the laws and of the environment based upon a later date of observing this random behavior. It's like the analogy he used was you could create the digits of pi with relatively simple algorithms, but by looking at pi, you couldn't go find the algorithm that created it.
Is that a symptom of how far down into the chaos we are?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what he's getting at.
Yeah,
Is there more to it than that? I mean, obviously there is endlessly more, but like,
I like the point that you said, which I think that article highlights, and maybe this is going to kind of, I think, come back to the language models, is there are a number of things which we've been able to model via reducible algorithms. Like, hey, if you throw a ball, you know about how far it's going to go, and you know about when it's going to land and where it's going to land. Those are very reducible things. But like, how does a society operate? How does an economy operate? Like, you could probably say, what are the rules for an economy? And we kind of know. It's like, yeah, we're trying to create value, trying to buy low and sell high, whatever. But how all of that necessarily becomes what we see today as like our larger consumer economy, that is a very, very difficult thing to model. And you can't do it via simple algorithms. So what Wolfram is pointing to is to say these systems may be modelable, but the way in which they will be modeled is a very different approach from trying to reduce everything to a single algorithm. Instead, it's probably going to come by a device or a method which can look at the pattern and understand what the next steps in the pattern are going to be. Because it is deduced what those little core semantic building blocks are. And that's why when we think about language, like why has language been so hard to model for years and years? Why is it so easy for a child to do and nearly impossible for a supercomputer to do? It's because the techniques that we'd been using were very much reducibility techniques rather than let's look at the pattern and try to and create devices that will understand that full pattern and then understand what comes next in it. But it's not just it's not quite so simple.
Right. But I mean, it makes me think of us as basically these devices. We are these devices which constantly, if we're awake or if we are conscious, we are constantly incorporating the past. And it's an indication of being alive, which is that, yes, patterns exist. There is such a thing as reducibility, but there's another side to life which requires that you don't attempt to reduce.
Well, I mean, it comes across in all esoteric schools with the idea that schools appear at various times throughout history and then they disappear because they're only appropriate at any given time. And any attempt to look backward at the writings of these schools, whether it's Christianity, Vedic teachings, or Buddhism, anything, you can gather certain things from it, but I don't think you can gather what was taught in those schools entirely, because there is a movingness to any aspect of truth that is not reducible, at least not in the way that we would like to reduce things always into something concrete and unmoving in our world. And so maybe it's interesting to hear that people are now trying that approach, or at least having that thought in mind, that if we're going to try to understand the most complex machines we know of humans, that we have to have a more fluid approach to it.
Well,
a really different approach. There was something you mentioned a while back, Johnny, about what is it about the ordering of matter a certain way that creates learning. So what we know for sure is, or maybe not for sure, but as much as one can know things, that we are learning entities, and we also know that we've created learning entities in these, I think most recently demonstrated, these language models. They learn. There's no doubt about it. If you were to like hold
by
one
all
up right
definitions
now,
of learning, right? We don't that as much as we can describe what learning is. It's still a mystery what it is, right?
Well, yeah. How would you define it as the ability to self-synthesize new outcomes or something along those lines?
It is typically that when presented, there are kind of two forms of it most commonly mentioned. One is that when presented with the same context, you can guess what's going to happen next in the sequence. And then the other is you can use that information that you've gained about what happens next in certain sequences. And then when you're presented with a novel set of contexts, you can figure out what the right answer is, or at least figure out what the most likely next occurrence is going to be.
Yeah, that. So
I'm going to actually bring us back
Yeah.
around to just finish
Yeah.
the concept, which is we know that there are a lot of entities out there, like maybe a piano or a cup or whatever, that probably either don't learn or don't learn on any kind of a time frame or way in which we are very familiar with. However, there are another set of entities or objects, depending upon how we look at it, which absolutely learn. So, what is it about that particular arrangement of matter that causes in this universe a group of matter to learn versus a group of matter to not learn?
So the one thing in this second law of thermodynamics article, one of the more fascinating kind of analogies he drew was in certain of his models, he could set them up in a way that the second law of thermodynamics seemed to be to not occur. Basically, the behavior displayed non-entropic qualities, even though the rules that dictated the kind of digital objects would lead to what you would think would be is entropy. And he set up all of these different things where it would be like over this time frame, this short time frame, it would appear entropic. There was no way to attribute anything but randomness to the behavior, no way to look backwards. But if you gave it long enough, a wave of non-entropic behavior would emerge. So are we and our learning things, or whatever these learning objects are they kind of self-organizing? And is there really no distinction in reality between randomness and organized material? So is our attribution, our use of the word random, our use of the word organized, our use of the word learning, are they all just words that don't have anything to do with reality, which is that reality is all the same everywhere, in some sense, you know?
Yeah, I follow. So there's the second part of that question may be a little more difficult for me to answer, but the first part, there is something that's that maybe points to the answer. So when training these both large models as well as when they've trained really small models, there's something called convergence. All convergence means is it gets the answer right more often. And sometimes when you're training these models, if you kind of see like maybe it starts off here not doing very well in terms of getting the right answer, and then it goes up after it learns and learns and learns and is presented with more things, then it gets to be better. And then after that, what they notice is after a certain amount of time, it crashes. And it stays actually fairly low for some time. And then there's something that happens that's called double descent, which it all of a sudden snaps back up and snaps up to a point where it is now able to answer the questions much more accurately than it could earlier in the training. And it has apparently understood some of the deeper context within which those languages or contexts are presented. This is not understood. At this point, researchers do not understand why that is the case. And from what I understand, it was an accident, the way that it was discovered the first time.
It sounds like
penicillin.
It's like the Jungian dream world or something. Like there's a subconscious within even something that we would categorize as mechanical, like a computer, that there is a subconscious state of being into which things go and new connections are made. It's like when you watch your kid, you can teach them all day, and then 3 weeks later they come back and have leapfrogged something you've taught them or didn't think you taught them, and it just came from what we would call nowhere.
Right.
But it's obviously, it's not nowhere, but that's the best we can do to describe it.
But that phenomenon of a kind of critical mass or a Rubicon or a quantum leap or whatever word you want to use for it, even in evolution, Stephen Jay Gould called it punctuated equilibrium. There's all sorts of parallels to this phenomenon of an explosion of new behavior and new life and new understanding, and nonlinear. It's nonlinear. It's non. So that it seems to be everywhere. So it shouldn't be surprising that it exists in AI and in large language models, because maybe that's a function of reality. I mean, I think of like Willow, 100th monkey experiment. Yeah, exactly. That critical mass phenomenon, like Willow, it's kind of related, but like I used to not allow her on my bed without a blanket, and so I'd only done it a number of times, maybe 10 or 20 times. I put the blanket up and say, "Come on up, Willow," and then one day she hopped up there and she was looking at me like this with no blanket. I said, "No, get off the bed, get off the bed," and she went and grabbed her blanket, brought it up onto the bed. and she displayed, I thought, like remarkable intelligence, because that would never taught. I'd never taught her to bring the blanket up there. So she went and just did it. She put the two things together. What I started to wonder though is like, what the fuck is going on in her mind? Does she understand that this is a prerequisite for being on the bed? Is that how she thinks of it? Does she think I want the blanket? Does she there's no way to know what is motivating her. She's just made a link.
Yeah.
And this is created, she's like, blanket, bed, these are linked.
These objects go together.
Right.
See, everything always just ends up going back to the big unanswerable questions for me, because like we can see that all forms that we observe, all objects seem to be trying to make connections based on laws that appear to exist. And if you were to go back to let's just go to a Big Bang for now. Let's say that's what is real or what's true. Like, there's still some unknowable underlying thing that speaks the first law into effect. Some people call that God, even. How dare they? But that's where. It's interesting from the perspective that this is where we're arriving at now in terms of AI and computer. Like, we're getting to such a high level of understanding that we're scratching at the surface of what it is humans understand, perhaps. And inevitably, when you get to where the end of what humans understand, they have to get back to this big unanswerable question that has to be approached from a different thing. What is the first law that causes two electrons to do what they want to do, or what's pre-electron?
What even is a law?
Exactly. We observe the law now, 14 billion years later.
Yeah, this is the reason I intentionally used. I mean, if I'm talking to religious people, I'll avoid the word God. But if I'm talking to secular people, I use the word God intentionally, because God is a kind of placeholder word for what Wolfram calls computational irreducibility, right? And he says we're computationally bound beings.
We are.
Right, that's very easy to understand that we are that. But the fact that he's so open and so obsessed with irreducibility is what I find very interesting about him. And I remember on the podcast I heard him talking about, it was about COVID stuff, because he was like, we tried to model what policies would lead to what and how the virus would spread, and he basically was like, it was too difficult. We couldn't do it. I was like, okay, so you're one of the smartest people on earth, and you reached the conclusion that you couldn't model this. And you and he just said it straight up, and I was like, oh, it's so refreshing to hear someone so smart admit that they don't know. It's such evidence that he's smart, Yeah.
This is kind of related, but we've talked about it before, the aperiodic art, like Islamic art.
Right.
That's a really interesting artistic expression, clearly not just artistic, of this phenomenon of like trying to create something that is not pattern detectable. Like, how would you even think about going about
but it clearly displays a pattern.
But
that also
displays a pattern, but not. It's like an actual a visualized paradox.
Yes, but in all sorts of Islamic art, there are intentional imperfections and it comes from the religious idea that only God is perfect. And that is these are all bad words for and irreducibility is one of them. It's all a bad word for whatever that is, the unknown, the unknowable, and being at ease with what's not known. So that for me, that's all related. To that idea.
So the most recent large language models that have come up, and let me go ahead and just define what that is because it's going to play into this directly. So a large language model is a AI system which is based on an abstraction of the brain, an abstraction of a neuron, and has been trained, at least for language, on text in just the way you were talking about earlier, Danny, of guess next. Mm-hmm. Once the model has been scaled up to a certain size or gone through a certain amount of training and kind of seen enough examples, then at that point, it is able to handle more and more general concepts. So when it starts off, it can do things like guess the next word, or complete a sentence, or make a paragraph, or get punctuation in the right spot. Once it gets to a larger size, like 60 billion parameters, then it can do some things like answer questions, create a narrative. Then once it gets to a still larger size, it can create stories, larger narratives, translate, create computer code. Then once it moves up to very large, like roughly 500 billion parameters, then what we see it being able to do is use proverbs, create proverbs, and create funny jokes, explain why the jokes are funny.
Theory of mind stuff as well, right?
And create, exactly, theory of mind, which means it can take into account different people's perceptions when those different people have very subtly different information in mind. Mm-hmm. And it includes that language model at the time that it is executing, having its own perspective of itself. So it is creating a narrative about itself. It has attachment to that narrative, and it very clearly is able to differentiate with itself versus others and know whether other people are working in alignment with its own interests.
It's the Hofstadter thing. It's a strange loop. It's like a...
Well, so it's like the first division of a being.
Right. This is
to go from what is like, it's not even binary. I guess it's binary in like a computer sense, but it's to self-observe it's like a 3-part
easiest
thing.
way to think about it is like when we have talked about consciousness, the word that we don't say but is implicit in there is human level consciousness. Mm-hmm. But it is actually probably more helpful to think about it as a continuum.
Yeah.
That consciousness, that learning, intelligence, all of these things are not binary. They're not yes or no. It is at what level of ability does it have to be conscious or to experience consciousness or to be able to answer certain kind of pieces of intelligence. So kind of going back to that question of irreducibility and to knowing our bounds. When the most recent version of ChatGPT came out, so that's working off of the version 4 language model, what they were able to use were basically top human tests like MCAT, graduate tests, law degrees, law certifications. They were basically throwing anything and everything that humans use to evaluate intelligence. And what they found is over time, it went from performing not very well, like bottom quarter of people, which is still not bad, that might be where I score, up to the 10th percentile. And in some cases, the very top percentile. So now we have models that perform as well as not just a human, but as well in certain domains as all of humanity.
Okay, so
And,
but this
well,
is
let me just finish
sorry.
one last thing in it, which is now those same testers, as they are testing the next set of models, are running into a huge problem, which is how do you test something
It's smarter than you.
which is smarter than you?
That's hilarious.
Well, and that's where, as a egotistical artist, is that perhaps the final frontier and domain? Is these is art, comedy? They're multidisciplinary.
No,
in that
massage.
sense. Well, no, I mean
That's the final domain. No, I've thought about this because you know.
well, yeah, you mean to be able to actually sense.
Masseuses are not going to be out of work. There's no machine yet that will. They might be. They might do things that people can't do, but people are always going to be want touch. That's irreducible.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Is there an aspect in the most aspirational aspects of art and music that is? I wouldn't even say like there's probably nothing that's going to be safe in terms of AI's ability to basically get it and perhaps exceed it. But there's an element of hope in me that at the top levels where the great artists, and certainly wouldn't put myself in this category, they are touching so close to the irreducible that it's like that's what's special about it. Because an MCAT or like a law degree is one thing, and I'm not denigrating that. Like I don't have a law degree or I'm not a doctor, but when you look at something, for instance, like I don't know, like I always go back to this, but like Bach, like Saint Matthew's Passion or Da Vinci, any of these the great artists throughout history. I don't think we can quite comprehend the scale and the depth of what they've created until you go deeper and deeper
I think what
into
you're
it.
basically expressing is fear.
Yeah, yeah.
You're basically what you're expressing is that if AI can do everything we can do eventually, does that make me invalid?
Yes, it's partially fear. It's partially what I would say is faith, and not faith in the way that word has been degenerated into a useless word. But the idea that if everything I can do can be captured by a machine,
Yeah.
I have faith that something exists outside of that. I don't have to give a name to it. I don't have to even think that
Okay,
it's positive
but
or whatever. But that I have to imagine and stretch my imagination to the point of thinking that something exists out of my current state of existence and being and thought. And that's, I think, what faith is at the deepest level in the religious sense, is that there is, it's an asymptote of being beyond which it is possible to ascend, but how, you know, like it's a paradox. Like, I can't get past it, but I know that something must exist beyond there.
I always had this idea, because I always used to think, you know, because back alien invasions, people always liked the idea of alien invasions, and this was before AI. Now AI is the new aliens, right? Because AI is, and it's more palpable because you can see it happening. But people always used to think, oh, if the aliens come down, will they be benevolent? Will they want to kill us? You know, oh, they must be these advanced beings. How are we going to get along with them? And what I always thought was the irony of it would be that the people who would be made irrelevant wouldn't be plumbers, it wouldn't be farmers and all that, or masseuses. It would be the intelligentsia. The intelligentsia would be the first people to lose their jobs if a higher intelligence came down, because aliens would be going, oh God, is this really what they think about physics? You know, aliens wouldn't be going, oh no, why are they doing massages? They would understand that that's inherently valuable.
Massages,
but
yeah, awesome, guys.
exactly.
How do we get
whatever,
out on that?
You know, or cooking or this or that, things that are actually so valuable and so commonplace, but because they're commonplace, you know, we take them for granted as not valuable, and we attribute value to thought or intelligentsia or to this. And I'm excited personally about the fact that previous ways of thinking and the people who think they are smart could be made entirely invalid. I think it's hilarious.
So let's be more precise about that. Is it people who are smart, or is it a different set of people to whom we are allocating significant economic value?
Exactly. But yes, the point is that it's that point, which is that we are too obsessed with attributing value to people and to ourselves.
There's an
And
infatuation with
yeah.
pseudo complexity, basically.
but it's not just. It's also it relates to our. If you want to be an optimist about it, let's say AI did, or aliens, or this or that. Let's say it invalidated everything that I've ever created. Mm-hmm. That is a potential starting point for a new way of being, which is that I needn't identify with what I create. There's a potential there, which is that maybe we all have inherent value, and not maybe, that's literally provable. That's one of my problems with atheism, is that how do you reconcile cause and effect?
Rant.
Yeah, how do you reconcile cause and effect and atheism? Mm-hmm. Because if there are laws which dictate behavior, and cause and effect is one of them, well, first of all, how do you separate a cause from an effect?
The Bhagavad Gita talks about working without concern for the fruits of your labor, and there's a linguistic way of saying to try and work without concern for cause and effect.
Yeah, but that's not quite where I'm going. Where I'm going is the question to atheists is always whether or not there's a God. But it's kind of goofy question before you establish whether or not there's a self. So that's a later question. Mm-hmm. It's almost an irrelevant question. It's like, why are you asking whether there's do you exist? And if you exist, but if you think about it...
Atheism is like a toddler. It's like the first stage of rebellion. Mm-hmm. It's necessary, but you have to grow up from being 2 years old. And I don't mean that condescendingly. I mean it extremely condescendingly because it's a necessary stage. I think you have to go through. You have to reject. But then you have to move on to what the next question is and to try to move beyond that. Because I see it with my 2-year-old. She's going through the phase now of no and
but maybe,
don't want to do all that.
Rather than obsessing, which is one of my favorite topics, which is to make, depending on the environment, I mean, it's like I like picking on atheists, but now, but that's just because because they're there.
You could make the same argument about religious people, or me, or scientists, or anybody.
I want to get back to this idea that that your hope is that art is special.
Not art. I don't mean art itself. Art is mechanical.
Okay.
What I mean is that I think, and again, there's a hopeful, faithful / fearful aspect to it, is that I feel like I have perceived something that suggests the beyond.
Right.
And that's a good, I agree with what you're saying. That's what AI is actually, it's showing, it's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's already doing it because, like you're saying, if it can pass fucking law exams, and on the music side, already what they're doing is it can make a record as good as Drake. Like, fine, that's fine. That's a fairly high proficiency. It's scratching the surface of where I think that can go.
Yes.
And it's coming. Like we're not going to outrun it for the most part, but I do have, and again, it could be as simple as like stupid or blind faith, but I have some part of me that feels like there is something beyond there. Not my art or music or art in general. Most of that is the working of machines. We can see it. Like I know what every song sounds like, and we all write the same song because I heard this. Like it's all mechanical. There's nothing special in art generally, but generally doesn't describe the transcendent.
So is your sense that we may be on the cusp of discovering something entirely new, something transcendent, as you said, because we're bringing entities or objects into being which are inherently more capable than not just a single person, but all of humanity cumulatively.
Yes. I think what
we're
it is
reaching the pinnacle of mechanical
Capability.
it's the concept of dying to yourself. Kind of it's the concept that you can die before you die. And what dies is your attachment to your current version of yourself and whatever value you arbitrarily attribute to that. And like as an antidote to people who get like depressed. So like the analogy I would use if I was talking to some of these people sometimes is, and they're often like highly rational, secular people who, and what they recognize, through their partial view of reality is their insignificance because they think quantitatively. They think, if you have any astronomical bent, if you recognize the size and power of the sun and the earth, and if you have the ability to wrap your head around quantities well, and that's where you stop, it can lead to a very depressive state.
Then you should probably start drinking pretty heavily.
Right, yeah, because you start thinking quantitatively. But at the other end of that spectrum, if they're scientifically bent, they'll believe that matter can't be created or destroyed. So what you've done now is eliminated scale with that thought. You've said that all matter is equally important, and all states of matter are equally important. So what are you depressed about?
Well, you see, there's an interesting Sufi story written by Idris Shah that describes a river flowing into a desert, and eventually the river dries up and it loses all hope of reaching the ocean. And the point of the story is that in order for the river to reach the ocean, it has to change its state from flowing water into evaporated water to reach the clouds and then be dropped into the ocean.
Right.
And it's a amazingly profound little children's idea. And I think, that's where AI immediately is pushing us, at least thought-wise, is that maybe we're reaching the end of thought. And that's a good thing. It's
the end of lawyers.
Yeah.
It's fucking exciting. And I'm saying that part with total false confidence because part of me is also fucking terrified at the fact that we may have no place in this new world.
Yeah, but again, to have a surface existential fear of something taking your job is perfectly normal and acceptable. And I say fucking kill all those Boston Dynamics dogs now before it's too late. But on a spiritual,
that guy who like pushes them in the videos, he's the first to go.
No, I know.
He's going to be the first.
But have you seen them already? Like
they're going to turn on their
kicking
handlers,
them. You can't kill.
Yeah,
they're already at the point of
anymore.
no return. But I'm saying from a spiritual standpoint, whatever that word means, but you know what I mean. It is a great point to be at. It's like, okay, cool. This type of thinking, of which I think I'm so good at, and this type of making music, it's done.
Yeah.
Try something entirely different, and I don't know what that is. But every great tradition, scientific and religious, has talked about this point.
Yeah.
They have talked about the point that there must be a death.
A paradigm shift.
Yes, and a rebirth. But before that death, and the important order in the esoteric schools is that there must be a knowing of self before you die. Otherwise, what dies? You can't just die. You must have an understanding of what it is that dies.
A paradigm.
Yes.
But it relates to that. I can't remember his name. Stephen Kuhn. He wrote Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he kind of popularized the phrase paradigm. And his whole point was that the paradigm is useful to a point, because the paradigm creates the axioms which allow you to develop greater understanding within a framework. And eventually, you reach the ceiling of that framework, and a new framework is necessary to move beyond that. So this AI, aliens, whatever anything like that, and that people's excitement and apprehension surrounding it, I think, is the prospect of the paradigms of society changing. That's
Yes.
what's enticing about it.
There's also, on the flip side, in this super spiritualist type realm of wanting always to escape the current paradigm they're in. Like, it's always
Yeah.
like this, like, well, once we get beyond the physical body, and
Dude,
it's
the
like,
iPhone 16, that's going to change everything.
yeah, but they do effectively.
Yeah.
The spiritual version of that is like, well, once I get out of this body, that's when life begins.
Right.
And I think that's obviously clearly a stupid way. It's you can accept that there is an above and a below, and that they do both exist, and that it's the bridge between the two that needs to be filled.
I
Perhaps.
just need one more round of Botox. That won't fix it.
I was just thinking the same thing.
So what evidence have you seen? This is now not outside of any spiritual or deep scientific sense. Like, what scared the shit out of you in terms of something you've seen AI achieve that's actually kind of really terrifying to you? And then on the flip side of that, that's like potentially inspiring as to what it could offer to us.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there were a few guidelines that one of the first AI conferences that was held, I think, like a decade ago in Asilomar, California, led by Max Tegmark, who's a professor at MIT. All of the heads of the AI research labs went there. Just like in Asilomar was actually the same place that the environmental movement of the United States started. And that's why they chose it. And what they laid out was, hey, there's certain things that you should not allow an AI system to do. An advanced one. One is, don't hook it up directly to the internet.
Whoops.
2, don't teach it to code. 3, don't train it on text that it itself has created or modified. So we're kind of 0 for 3 at the moment.
Right.
Wait, the third one, why does that matter?
Self-awareness or something?
Yeah. Two things. So it can produce text, potentially add information in that text, which is not easy to detect for us, and basically create a method to for it to create its own Easter eggs. So its own kind of trapdoors. And if you look at what's going on right now, a tremendous amount of code is being added to most systems that are out there. And the code is notably not security proof.
Right.
Which is not a surprise because most code out there isn't either.
Right.
So
Yeah,
it's
I
kind of
mean,
like, it's more of the same.
Is this going to change end user license agreements? Because they're, at the moment, they say when you agree to this, you are agreeing to have this data collected. And eventually it's going to say, you agree that we don't know what's happening.
It's something like where this might be used.
Right. And you agree that basically it's going to be a very short end user license agreement, which says, we don't know what's going on, and you agree not to sue us. That's all you really need.
Yeah. That's kind of the end user license agreement today. But
Right. It's very elaborate.
So when they had this conference, and now it's been ignored, obviously, by everyone.
pretty much.
What's the
result?
Yeah.
So the portion that, if we think about, if we go back to the early part of the conversation on alignment, we hope that these systems are aligned and that they have they even have a value structure, which is unclear. Second, that value structure somewhat matches our own, and that they then also don't feel like deceiving us in order to move forward on their plans.
But wouldn't they only deceive us if they had a value structure?
Big old question.
Right. Yeah.
So let me just kind of go back and answer the question. What came about in early April was a shocker for a number of people out there, which was a freshman at USC, University of Southern California, published a paper saying, hey, I figured out a way to have language models behave like an agent. And what that means is, if you have a language model today and, you go to ChatGPT, you can type stuff to it, it outputs stuff back to you, and that's that. It won't go and mess with things, at least as far as we know, on your computer or change the temperature settings in your house or any of those other things. It has limited capabilities at this point of getting out of the box.
Right.
What this student did and what others have now taken forward very rapidly is something called AutoGPT, but it creates an agent. So let's say you have something simple, like I want to negotiate a better phone plan. Mm-hmm. Like we all want a better phone plan. Mm-hmm. Then what it'll do is it'll take that one sentence, send it to the language model and say, what steps would I need to go through in order to get a better negotiated deal on my phone plan? The language model says, probably these 6 things. So, go out there, study who the major providers are in your geography, know what their offers are right now, know what your current plan is, negotiate it. So then it sends it back and has that list of items. Then they send that list of items back to the language model and say, pretend like you're an expert within negotiating cell plans. Is this the right set of activities to do? And it'll say, well, yeah, but the thing you really need to point out is what's available within the contract. What is the current contract that you're under? So I know what the negotiation is. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then it goes back and it breaks that one task, the first task of know what your current plan is, into subplans. And it then also has access to your account, which people have to purposefully do. And they also would have access to the internet. So it can go out and monitor these things. So it goes out, does the research, then it emails each of those providers or creates a chat session with them using your account, your email. It monitors it. It will then negotiate back and forth with the sales rep on the other side and finally present you with an option saying, hey, I found a better one. It's 20% off what you're paying today. Go do it.
Right.
So, that's just a simple use case. You can scale that all the way up and down in terms of level of sophistication, complexity, and hierarchy.
Right.
The fascinating part is when this came out, there was one database provider that was being used, free one. And they said they were creating about 100 free database instances a day max. They put out a note 3 weeks ago saying that they are now at 10,000 new instances being created per day, and they see that number rapidly increasing. So what this means is there are either a lot of people out there who are creating these, or that is just part of the workflow of these agents themselves, is to go create these instances on the way to creating enough agents to go execute the plan that's needed. So right. the one of the other kind of tripwires along the way is, even if you're able to give it access, make sure the access to the internet is locked down. And so the positive and negative there is, the positive is great. We can now go do any number of tasks that would have just been a pain and have them automated.
I mean, I can envision this government's working with device manufacturers to limit to have a biometric aspect of access to the internet, and that they're going to reserve these AI agents for their own purposes to do the work that they want to do, in terms of collecting data on their citizens. But that's crazy.
Well, you're going to have some proof of human thing.
How?
I don't know, but it would like
Biometrics.
What underlies biometrics? Digital files.
Right.
Digital files are also inherently corruptible.
Right, but it would have to be something of there would be a capture device, a physical capture device, where input is necessary from a human. That it's going to be a cat and mouse game where you keep trying to find new ways to prove humanity to do certain things. But also, obviously, like, how do you do that? I don't have no.
This is all out of my depth, but I could picture that all major websites complying with certain limitations. For example, if this digital person, is inputting data at a rate that is not believable, they're not a human. Then it will. I can envision having to go get your internet license from a government employee who's going to say, here you go. Here's your new 2044 social security number, QR code, tattoo shit, whatever it is, chip, and now you can go access the internet, and we know that you're a person accessing the internet, and we'll just reserve AI for ourselves.
Isn't this a part of what proper crypto token systems are trying to address? Is that you basically have to put a cost on processing and or activity to eliminate just widespread bot doing everything. Like, there has to be a cost, as in, like, if I want to go do something, there's a physical consequence it needs to cost something. Yeah. It's an economic model that has to arrive. Otherwise, if it's a free-for-all, then obviously AI wins.
I do find it, just with the example you gave of the price discovery, right? That everyone always thinks of these economic systems like communism, socialism, capitalism, this or that, fascism, mixing of state and private and all the property structures, all of that kind of stuff. They think of them as these are ideas, and then we do these ideas, as opposed to your favorite phrase, emergent phenomena. I think of economic systems as a consequence of the state of the organization that is already existing. Communism emerges out of certain circumstances, and now we're in this new circumstance where the speed of information and the speed of travel is so fast that the world is much smaller than it's ever been, and the economic systems and the governing systems that arise out of it are going to be so different, and we can't anticipate them, and they're a product of fundamental technologies, travel and speed of communication and all that kind of stuff. And capitalism as an idea, maybe that's more related to ship travel.
Yeah, steam engines.
Yeah, that kind of. And maybe communism is related to how much of your country is still based in agriculture. How many people are employed as farmers? That's going to lead you to become a communist or this or that. And whereas people are so attached to their idea of how governance should work, and they don't see it as just a consequence of other things.
What if we were to go the other way around? What I mean by that is, what if we have the agency incorrect? What if we have the cause and effect wrong? Mm-hmm. So we've looked at this as, here are the circumstances, here are the people involved. Those things have created the concepts, and it means that people need to behave a certain way or think a certain way in order for that concept to grow. Mm-hmm. What if it's the other way around? What if it is, and this is kind of radical and unproven, and just we're in Brooks fairy tale land at the moment. What if it's a matter of that concept has agency?
Yes, like a meme.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it begins to acquire resources and push within the substrate that it works in, which is humanity, or humanity's shared thoughts.
Right.
Yeah.
Is the question, are you smoking the cigarette or is the cigarette smoking you? Is that effectively the...
It is.
Okay. Yes. I mean, there's obviously, maybe it's neither.
Are we growing cars? Or
Maybe there is no difference between cause and effect. Because
without even getting into having to reverse the arrow of time, like maybe there's just such bigger causes and effects affecting humanity that's another way to look at it. Like this is all moving in some grand direction for whatever, aliens, or there's another star that's trying to eat our galaxy. You know, like it's happening at such a grand scale that we are seeing like these tiny ripples and thinking
It's
like,
the George Carlin bit about plastic. He's like, maybe the Earth wants plastic, and that's the only fucking purpose that humans serve. Is that, and then once
Yeah.
we've made enough plastic, the Earth will get rid of us. Done.
And enjoy its hoard of plastic.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you have to try to imagine a giant being looking over Earth, like an actual being. I mean, like the way we look over ant piles,
Right.
and trying to determine what it is they're doing.
Well, you opened up the idea that consciousness is a continuum.
Yeah.
And you know, we're getting real into fairy tale land here, Brooks. You're going through a kind of a you're having a rebirth as a former computer person. Now you're turning into you're waiting for those full moon parties.
From geek to philosopher.
Yeah. But
That's my program. That's why I came on today. It's 6 easy steps. Y'all are gonna love it.
Geek Squad, that's going to turn into a fucking cult 200 years from now. It's not going to.
End of the year.
If consciousness is a continuum, then what, like, you could imagine that the sun is some a highly advanced being.
Could well be.
Yeah, I mean, we can't imagine life without it. All the energy on Earth comes from it. All of the expression of life is electromagnetic energy behaving after it's stored. Right, like sunlight. Albert St. Georgi, he was the guy who discovered vitamin C, how muscles kind of work. He was a multiple Nobel laureate, genius, biochemist. And he said that life is fundamentally two processes, photosynthesis and its reversal. And that kind of, if consciousness is a continuum, and there's no way to get into whether you're conscious or I'm conscious or that computer's conscious or that dog is conscious or the table, well, I believe that they are, based on faith. There's no proof of that. And I have faith that the sun is a conscious being as an extrapolation. And I think it's ridiculous to not be open to that. And that's my problem with the fucking atheists.
So when you do sun salutations in the morning within yoga, I just literally envisage us as a bunch of cells within a great body doing our morning exercises, trying to help the sun, our big body, out. The same way I would fucking hope that my little blood cells wake up every morning and do their push-ups to help me exist. And
Come on,
by that
system,
kind of
go.
stupid analogy,
But
I think...
you know what's funny is that when you do your push-ups, your cells want to do their push-ups.
Right. Well, no, but it's who's the center of that universe and where does cause begin?
Yeah.
It's kind of like a silly way of thinking about it, but like, yeah, in my brain, the sun is a conscious being, and it's probably not the most conscious being.
That maybe is a bit of a callback to the question posed earlier on why is it that certain arrangements of matter create consciousness, or at least learning, and others don't. And at this point, we've only looked at the systems which we are building and said, when we arrange atoms in a certain way, then we can get this system to be able to learn. we haven't really taken those same concepts of this arrangement and gone around and looked about what we would consider the natural world to see where else might this arrangement occur. So could it be the sun? Could it be forests? Could it be, people think octopi are sentient?
Yeah, they are. The funguses. I think the sentient argument for me, it's like once you accept the hard problem, which is that you can't actually prove sentience outside of yourself to anyone. It's even hard to prove it to yourself sometimes that you are, conscious.
I feel attacked, but go on.
No. I mean, like for me, it's like every time I bump my head, I'm like, oh, I'm an unconscious zombie, But it is so obvious to me that consciousness is pervasive. Now, whether it's a phenomenon that comes out of matter or whether consciousness creates matter, all of these for me are kind of inadequate anyway, descriptions that don't matter. Consciousness and matter are inseparable, or at least matter is inseparable from consciousness. Because, what's that Billie Eilish album, Where Do We Go When We Sleep? It's a good question. What if there's no observer, etc. All of this stuff has already been addressed thousands of times, and we don't need new language unless you're a person who's not thought about this, and perhaps you haven't had your mind opened up in those ways, then it needs to be opened up. But then the task changes from breaking your preformed ideas of how things work into inducing a different state of seeing that could allow for a different kind of understanding. Now, and I don't know if you can necessarily think your way into that state of perception. It might require different kinds of frictions. That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah, I mean, it's. If we are even if we are just purely this mechanical thing, to think that the thinking center of this machine is the only thing that can get you somewhere, I think is like silly. It's like looking at a car and saying the wheels make it move. You have to try and understand the whole machine to see what the machine is capable of.
There was an interesting point here about AI is not genuine where humanity is. That's the only hope and difference of validity of humans compared to AI. Think about the accountability of all standards is diminishing with the use of AI.
Accountability. Well, that's a similar argument to corporate personhood. That when it's a corporation, you remove culpability, right? And there's all sorts of social type experiments of this kind of thing, which is when you create some distance between the crime and the person, people are much more willing to commit the crime. Like they would have people, self-report on how many questions they got right, and then for each question they got right, they get $1 on these little, and people would lie at a certain rate, and then if they would answer. And then if they redeemed a token, which was then redeemable for $1, so if there was one extra step of separation between the money and the lying, they were much more willing to lie. So I do think that there is an element of accountability that happens when there is distance, right? Then you could say the same thing about not everyone, lots of people eat meat. No one wants to kill the cow.
Well, it's like, would you rather shoot someone in the face or drone strike 10 people?
Which person?
Dick Cheney can answer that. He's done both.
He's like, yeah. He's like, why shoot first?
Would you rather shoot someone in the face and get them to apologize or drone strike 10 people? I was just thinking, the distance thing applies to Dick Cheney as well, because he's like Republican down the line. And then it's like, well, what do you think about gay marriage? He's like, oh, that should be legal. And he's like, well, why? And he goes, oh, my daughter's gay, I guess. It's like, oh, so the proximity And that's the old it's the old experiment. What's it called? The bridge. What is that? That bridge experiment. You know, like you're on your way to a party and it's a drowning child as you're crossing a bridge, and the guy doesn't save the child and he says, "Well, it's going to be late." Mm-hmm. And everyone looks at him like he's a psychopath. But it just highlights the issue of proximity and as it relates to accountability or morality or whatever.
Well,
you can only be accountable to something which is in your proximity.
But you see, that also comes back to your question of self. If you perceive self as this incredibly isolated thing that exists separate from everything else, then your accountability to the rest of existence is nil. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of it, I guess the aim would be to have accountability to everything, which I don't think necessarily means like go save every drowning bee, mm-hmm. you know. But there is an element of that it's like self-evidential. The more connected you feel to things, the more accountable you are, and it's governed by some deeper conscience, not by law.
So yeah,
I actually pulled two things together from both the early part of this discussion as well as a prior discussion that you all had about Austin. So you all noted that when you came to Austin, you encountered something that you had not before, which was a willingness of people to be, to be open to each other, mm-hmm. and to be open to a shared community. And that wasn't a top-down thing. Mm-hmm. It was instead something which everybody independently needed to be open to.
Oh, this came from the Henry Miller idea.
Yes.
Yeah, about the idea that
communities is an emergent phenomenon.
Yeah.
And the second part is, what is it about Sam's that kind of feels that way?
It's very hard to say. I don't think it's hard. It's easy. You know, you could say it's this or that or this, and there could be a fundamental note that is creating long-standing resonances, you know, that we don't know. And in my mind, it's linked to Penny. So everyone thinks, oh, it's all of these things matter. You know, like obviously all the people who run it, they obviously mattered, like the staple of Ramsey and his band on Saturdays and all that kind of stuff. And obviously there's a kind of ethos there. But the more I think about it, how fucking weird is it that Penny's in her 90s? She's like 95 or something like that, or something, you know, and she's there almost every night, mm-hmm. watching the music, listening to the music, and I don't know what her involvement is anymore. But my understanding is that she intentionally kind of handed it over to preserve it. Mm-hmm. You know, she didn't feel like she had the kind of energy or capacity to keep running this place. So that for me is a harmonic in musical terms. It, you know, everything that happens there is a kind of harmonic of the fundamental tone, and I don't know what that fundamental tone was. It might have been one person, it might have been a group of people, it might be the location, it might be. Who knows? Maybe it's Remember the Alamo. Who the fuck knows? I don't know. You know, I don't.
There's if the right do, as in the first note of a scale, is sounded with the right intention, that can carry for a long time. And if it's sounded incorrectly with the wrong intention, it hits inevitable barriers in its movement through the universe, and it changes. Mm-hmm. And perhaps something in there was sounded right where it's been able to keep a thing through it, which gives you the thought of when an idea lasts for thousands of years in humanity, or a piece of music or art or scientific thought lasts for a long time, it has to be valued just for that alone. Right. It has to be valued for the fact that it was sounded in such a way that it withstood all the natural tendency towards slowing down and or changing that exists in material world, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like it was well shot, that arrow. So you have to try to think, why was that well shot, you know? And it's something like we all deal with on a personal basis. We deal with as a band, trying to stay together, have a singular focus, like. the intentions have to. It's more than just like keep it together. It has to be like what's the if the intentions are right, everything else falls into place.
Well, there is a kind of the aphorisms that they have hanging up on the wall, I think, are linked to it, because and it's in keeping with the kind of disrepair aspect of the place, which is like there's a sign that says "Friends are the best part of life," and or like one of the other, what's the other one? Someday you'll remember how important these days were, or something like that, or how, I can't remember the other one. They basically they sound like something you could get at Home Goods as like a trite little pillow that you could do if you're setting up your new Airbnb and you wanted to appeal to the Gwyneth Paltrow aficionados of the world. But in that context, there are cliches which are true.
Yeah.
They're
Yes.
It's absolutely true. Like the holes in the ceiling don't matter. That truly doesn't matter.
No.
So I think that is one of the threads that people who like that place and who want to continue it. I think that's one of the things that they're aiming for. And everyone who goes there is like, and the people who find it special have kind of identified with that.
Well, it
side
has
of
a natural selection process to it, Sans, because if you walk in there and you're the type that's going to leave a shitty Yelp review, then it's not for you, and you're not going to come back.
Yeah.
It's like we always talk about, like you can know that certain restaurants are going to be good by the types of bad reviews that are left there. Like, food took 20 minutes extra to come out, or the service was terrible. They didn't bring me napkins. Like, okay, you don't understand the intention of this place, So, yeah. All right. I think we should stop. There was a little pause there. I think we should stop because it's been an hour and 47 minutes. Let's do this again.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to talk about, I'm sure. And then the next time we do it in a few months or whatever, it'll probably all have changed and we'll all be working for Twitter AI because that's the one thing. I guess let's just talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
He's building probably going to be the most powerful, worst AI, right?
Perhaps,
That's got to be the secret plan of like acquiring Twitter, Elon.
I think that eventually, once we get in to have a better understanding of what these systems look like, we should probably do a forensic analysis of the applications and the AI applications that Facebook has been running for the last decade.
You mean Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I thought he was the AI application that Facebook has been running.
It was maybe just a matter of self-propagation.
If that's the case, I'm not worried because he's not very advanced. I
Why
know
would
that
one-
he's a bot.
Yeah. Humans like self-powered surfboards.
With flags.
Right. Have you seen that clip of him where he's like sweating in that interview and the interviewer is like, "Do you want to take your jacket off?" And he goes, "No." And then he goes, "I guess I could take it." It's like watching a computer. It's one of the most interesting things I've ever seen in my life. He starts like kind of panicking and then I don't know how to describe it other than it's as if AI was doing an impression of a human.
Okay, speaking of that, this is not bad, and I don't want to shit on Matthew McConaughey because I basically like a lot of what he's done.
No, he's
reached a point now, in my opinion, where it's like enough already.
Yeah.
Matthew, here's an ad for Lincoln, because obviously he's heavily involved with Lincoln. But I wish he would just do an ad like, I like this car, it's fast, it does this, buy this car.
Right.
Fine, it's a fucking ad, it's commerce, I believe in capitalism to a certain extent. Watch this ad now, how genuine it is, quote.
I love road trips. I think I've learned more on road trips than I've learned just about anywhere else in life. It's like a classroom, it's like an office. It's a place where my memory catches up with me. It's a place where I get far enough away from my past that I'm not worried about it, and something about that makes me not even worry about my damn future, and I can be present, and then all of a sudden my past and the future all makes hell more sense. Road trips are so good for us in the head and the heart and the spirit. And I'm ready to take one. Again, how about you? You want to take a road trip? I'll take my road trip. You take your road trip. And if you can't take a little road trip right now, What about a road trip you've taken in the past? Share some memories, some photos, some videos of road trips in your past where you crossed some things that turned you on, that you got an appetite for, maybe an indigestion for. The memory caught up with you, where you got inspired, where maybe something happened to you on the road trip where you changed for the better. Share your favorite photos and videos with me on social media, and I'll share them with you. At Officially McConaughey, hashtag Highway to More, because that's the point of this whole gig. When we take a road trip, it's not just like we're going nowhere. We're going somewhere. Hopefully trying to get more out of where we're going and be more of ourselves when we get back.
Jesus fucking Christ.
It's like, I will never buy. I'm boycotting Lincoln
I-
because
I-
of that ad. It's
I
like
wish
just
the
fuck-
serial killer killed him in True Detective now.
It's he's crossed the Rubicon, if that's the right phrase. Of
That
into-
is an ad, right?
Yeah, no, it's a straight up ad for Lincoln. Like he's tagged Lincoln.
Oh, yeah.
It's a thing. I mean, if it's not, then I don't know what the fuck that is. If it's not an ad, it's like
oh
this-
yeah, the My Lincoln Motor Co. was parked in this video.
It's I hate that worse than crass advertising.
Yeah,
It's,
no,
it's,
yeah.
it's something about it. It's like stupidly sneaky, because who doesn't know it's an ad, and who's still buying his like rootsy thing? It's weird, because I think he actually is kind of a lot of him seems like a cool guy. It's just weird that it's captured him or something.
You know, the only way to actually criticize this would be to be offered the amount of money he was offered for that and turn it down. Which we've done that.
We've done that. I mean, not the amount.
Yeah,
of
but we
money.
regretted it.
No, some of them I didn't regret.
No, the Pizza Hut thing we regretted.
No, I don't regret that one.
I do.
No, there were other ones I didn't regret. The Pizza Hut one, because that was.
I guess you could justify that it led to other.
Yeah, it was. I don't mean morally. I don't believe
Right,
in
right.
morals, but it was a good business decision to reject the pizza.
I guess what this
Pizza
is
Hut
like, this is
came to us
embarrassing.
saying they wanted to use our song in an ad, and we were reluctant. And then they sent us the ad, and it was like cheesy pizza, and like "Come with me now," and cheesy pizza lands on it. It was just like so embarrassing. We thought this might actually be bad for our brand, which was non-existent at that point. And they came back to us and they said, "What if we just do instrumental?" They kept raising the number. I think what happened was an advertising person had put the song in, showed it to someone higher up at corporate. They liked it. And now he didn't want to fucking get in trouble for having pitched something where he hadn't cleared the song. So it was like, what
They got
number
trapped,
can I give
yeah.
you? He was trapped. So he's like, what about this? Make up a number. And we just said no. We didn't think it was a good look for us. And Danny's saying, yeah, we regret. Yeah, obviously I'd love to have had that money. But I think more money came from, like, it could have been one of those ones where someone would be sitting around, which I'm sure they do with us, because it's not like we turned down a lot, going like, what the fuck is Congas doing? Like we're doing with Matthew McConaughey.
The only reason
here.
this makes me uncomfortable is because there's still a part of me that wants to be taken seriously by the world, but that is a goofy thing to want. And maybe he's just fully fucking liberated, and he doesn't take himself seriously, and he doesn't care if you don't take him seriously.
I'd like to believe that, but I know exactly what you're talking about, where there's someone like a Marlon Brando who will go make the biggest piece of shit movie, be reading the script off his co-actors' heads, that he's sticking it to their heads. He's like, I don't
Dylan.
care about acting. I'm making money. Like, I
Yeah.
don't care. From him, fine, I get it. That's just like
Yeah.
whatever. Make money, make a mockery of the entire thing. This doesn't feel like a mockery
Right.
of it. Feels like he still believes like, well, if I'm going to do a Lincoln ad, I want it to feel
Authentic,
soulful,
yeah.
authentic.
Well, like when Bob Dylan did his whatever he did, American Express type stuff, it's fucking hilarious to me because he's still he's just Bob Dylan. Like he can basically do no wrong. Maybe it's like I don't know. It makes me. The way he's looking at me makes me uncomfortable.
That's what I'm saying. I'm actually comparing him to like DJ Khaled. I'm starting to appreciate
DJ
DJ
Khaled's
Khaled
the best.
way more.
Yeah.
Just honest, crass
Right.
commercialism is so refreshing.
Exactly. Like when DJ Khaled will be what did he do? I saw an ad for John Daly has like vodka drinks, like in a can. and DJ Khaled goes, John Daly, vodka drink. I'm gonna try it right now. As soon as he puts it up to his mouth, he goes, it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's just like, he didn't have time to touch sides, you know, and that's fucking awesome. Like, he's one of my heroes now.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll post links to your Medium so they can go actually read in more depth about AI and all topics concerning that.
Yep.
And we'll be back probably next week with another podcast. And we need to do some breakdowns of some tracks that we've done recently, Surfing USA and Let's Run Away. We'll probably get to those next week. Join the Discord, which is congos.com/Discord. And that's about it. Thank you for coming on, man. It was great chatting with you. And we'll see you at Sam's. All right. See you guys.
See you guys.